Hi friends, my name is Samantha Rei. Welcome to Cinematire. This is your future. How would you dress it? You know what? Now that I think about it, let me just go get into something a little more comfortable. Well then, let's get started. In episode 1, we're going to talk about the show that made me realize that I really needed to do this channel. I've been ranting about good and bad TV, movies, and costumes for years. The reason I chose to do this one is because it subverted all of my expectations by being one of the most well thought out and well dressed worlds I've ever seen. Well, I mean, at least in the last 10 years. I'm talking about CW's The 100. I'll be starting with examples about how effective these costume designers were in dressing this future, and a few times they technically missed the mark. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this series, there are going to be spoilers. We have the adults on the Ark, which is the series of space stations that were connected after the global disaster. There are the Grounders, who are the people who survived the disaster, and most are divided into different clans. The 100 are the kids that get sent down to Earth to scout the planet beforehand. There are the inhabitants of Mount Weather, the people who survived the disaster by hunkering down in a military bunker. Lastly, we have Sanctum, the colonists who left the Earth before the disaster and built a thriving settlement over almost 250 years. Let's start with the Ark. Nothing at this point, costume-wise, tells you what year this takes place. It's 97 years after the disaster, but they don't tell you that right away. They don't tell you what year it is, they don't tell you what year it started. The clothing doesn't immediately betray the timeline. Everything is fairly utilitarian, there's staples, and nothing appears to be fashion. A little side note. I always say that clothing is what you wear to keep yourself covered, to keep you from getting arrested for indecent exposure, and fashion is what you wear to express yourself. It's language. On the Ark, everything is, for the most part, threadbare. One can tell which things were sturdy when they were handed down, and which things weren't. Which things have been darned, remade, repurposed, patched, or cut off. Things like pants, underwear, bras, undershirts, they were probably stocked up on when they loaded onto the ship. Things like this were in greater supply because places like crotches, armpits, elbows, they've got a lot of friction because you're moving around. And this is the future, so there's a lot of tech fabrics, and even though those are pretty good for certain things, they're really thin, so unless there's something like leather or silk, they're gonna wear out. There are things that have been knit, they look homespun. Probably made from yarn that was repurposed from other yarn things. They're kind of the only things that look new. No one appears to be sentimental about clothing, but they are sentimental about trinkets such as jewelry and watches. There are a few times where you see kids wearing what could be considered fashion. There's a scene where Octavia is getting ready for a dance, and she's hand sewing, which shows that she's one of the few people who knows how to sew. But she's also wearing like a cute little dress. It looks like it's still made out of t-shirt fabric like the other stuff, but it's got just kind of a cute little fluttery skirt. And that's one of the only times you see a dress for probably 2 seasons. There's also a part where Clark flashes back to her dad, and she's wearing a shirt that has kind of a lace back, and it's very worn out, it's ripped up, but it's obviously fashion. Even if they didn't think it was fashion, for the person who originally owned it, it was. They're clearly hand-me-downs. They've been mended several times. They're not things that were made from scratch. As I stated before, minimal holes don't appear to be a priority. Patches look sizable. Looks like they're made to keep the integrity of the garment. Most of them look like they were probably made out of other salvaged garments. Creative darning on the jackets is really cool. Darning is where you take a thing and kind of zigzag back and forth on a thing to attach a piece, and it looks kind of ugly, but it keeps the integrity of the garment. The guards' uniforms have a lot of wear, likely because they're just a jacket. They aren't pretty, but they're recognizable regardless. They're in pretty good shape. I think it's because they treat it with military respect. They clean them as much as they can, they hang them up, they fold them. It's a military mentality about it. Taking care of each item, it's kind of like a sacred extension of themselves. This is my jacket, this is my gun type of thing. Chancellor Jaha, he wears a lot of really interesting things that are probably closest to fashion. At one point he has on a thing that looks Asian inspired, and he also wears a lot of these really beautiful asymmetrical sweaters. I can't tell if it's a status thing, but it surely sets him apart. This is a clever way to bring attention to a character and show you in a subtle way that they are different and important without making them look like they're standing out like a sore thumb. On Earth, Jasper's wearing a shirt that says Earth Day 2052. This starts the timeline at a minimum of 2149. If Earth was destroyed that year and his ancestors somehow grabbed that shirt, or he himself made it as a joke to be clever, that's something that is a nod if you're paying attention. It's very clever because it's not necessarily an audience-facing thing, but it still gives us a clue. The kids while on Earth are wearing what they wore on the Ark. Their clothing continues to get more and more ragged as the season goes on because even though they are washing it, generally teenagers don't want to have to do stuff they don't want to do if they don't have to do it. On the Ark, they're probably being told to do it because it's a job or a skill and they're doing their part, but they're in survival mode, not fix their clothing mode. They're looking for weapons and food. While they do appear to be adding things to their clothing as the show progresses, it seems more for personal identity and not actually fixing it in any way. There's a couple of things where you can tell they may have added some structural things to it, but most of it seems to be for personal identity, like when Murphy adds his spiky red shoulder thing. There is one thing to note. Most of the kids wear majority blue with accents of burgundy, but the first time we see bright red is when Raven Reyes lands on Earth. The next time we see red is when Lincoln is being rescued. A lot later, Jaha lands on Earth and he's rescued while wrapped up in a red parachute and jumpsuit thing. After her exile, we see Clark again and her hair is bright red. Also, when we meet the AI Allie, she's wearing a contemporary to us bright red dress. One of my very favorite directors who utilizes color is Martin Scorsese. It's one of those things where if you know kind of the idea of how color works and what it evokes in people, you can use it in that way. Like in The Aviator, color was used just like this to signify certain milestones in the story. You can use color to signify anything from a feeling to an emotion to a memory or even an organization or clan. I love the juxtaposition of ragged clothing and the unused blankets that they bring in later in season 1. It shows that there were some things that survived, and also these kids and just kind of how put upon they've been when they wrap themselves in this kind of clean thing for the first time. It's a very separated kind of feeling on screen. One of the other clever things they're doing is using a color story for each group. On the Ark, it's blacks and blues for the adults, grays, creams. There's a little bit of color here and there, but since it's dark filter, it doesn't really show up, so it kind of evokes that cold vacuum of space. On Earth, with the kids, the majority is stark blue, gray, burgundy, and later stark red. As the show continues, the kids definitely shake it up a bit, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So now we're going to move on to the Fallen Ark and also what will eventually collectively be called Sky Crew. Once the Ark falls, the 100 really start to individualize their clothing, but the adults are rigid. The adults appear to be in two groups. The leaders who are dressed in a way that kind of signifies rank, and everyone else. They're mostly in utilitarian long sleeve shirts and just kind of pants. It's the kind of thing that you know will probably still be around in 100 years because they were around 100 years ago. There are certain staples that are going to continue to exist, like jeans, a motorcycle jacket, things that have been around for 100 years that if you were to wear them in 100 years, they won't feel like cosplay. All right, now, let's get fun. We're going to talk about the grounders. So the grounders are the people who were left over on Earth after the disaster. They're separated into clans, and they each have their own kind of little differences. They're kind of akin to different versions of punk or goth, more than they are tribes. So often in post-apocalyptic things, they resort back to non-white ideas of tribalism. So I think it's really interesting that they built this world having access to way more things than just kind of a historical idea of the other. They would pick an aesthetic and dress in things according to what they saw in their everyday lives. So of course, the next generations would mimic the same thing, right? There are many different kinds of punk and goth, but to outsiders, they all kind of look the same. Just goths are white makeup with black hair, and punks are plaid and chains. But to the people who are in the group, they know which different subsects are what they are because of the different subtle nuances of what they did to their outfits or their hair, their jewelry. They all have different variations on battle makeup, especially the leaders. I appreciate that their makeup looks a lot more inspired by heavy metal. It's not something as easy as Native Americans or different African tribes like a lot of post-apocalyptic things do. It could be so easy to pull from other cultures that are considered the other, but they don't do that. Tattoos are also socially acceptable, so there are a lot of face tattoos. There are a lot of back tattoos. All of them kind of, once you've watched the show a couple times, signify which clan they're in. It could be Tree Crew, it could be Asgeda, but you figure out what it is. Also, I'm gonna throw out terms, and you're not gonna know what they are, so just go watch the show. The Grounders utilize found objects as a way to make armor. Lex's shoulder armor is 2 thick rubber tires carved down and a cape of this beautiful pumpkin-colored silk velvet. Some use bent down pieces of metal, some use modified sports padding. Lincoln actually has skeleton hands on his cowl, not dissimilar to this. Some have monster masks, and they actually look like they were probably from a Halloween store, so I love that you can tell that they just scavenged things over 97 years. They want to intimidate each other. They want to look scary. Some of them wear layered on tattered clothing that looks like kind of a ghillie suit. It's really good for brush camo. The Reapers, who are kind of a scary, unexplained offshoot of the Grounders, you don't really find out who they are and what happened to them until season 2. They appear to be covered in filth, blood, and mud, and dirt. The Reapers' filthy appearance is also very jarring compared to the regular Grounders. It seems that even though the kids of the 100 have been fighting the Grounders, they've also been inspired by them. Sort of like when people who don't understand fashion of other cultures decide to appropriate it. But I digress. No, I don't. A common theme in this show is colonialism. So the idea that these kids are essentially colonists would be inspired by the new people around them, even if they're scared, is very realistic. Clark, our main character, starts affecting the look when she and Anya, a Grounder, escape Mount Weather together. I appreciate that Octavia, a girl who is an extraneous child in a one-child society, has affected the Tree Crew hairstyle. Tree Crew is another clan. They're one that you see a lot. And because she wasn't actually supposed to exist, she's always felt like she didn't exist. And to have the Grounders accept her, she wanted to be able to show that she was a part of them and started affecting their hairstyle. It shows the acceptance by her friend and the leader of Tree Crew, Indra. And it also kind of shows her dual loyalty between the 100 and the Grounders. She's never felt like she belonged, and she wanted to be able to feel right. When Jaha falls into the desert, we're introduced to some scavenger nomads, and they appear to be the only Grounders that wear light-colored clothing. It makes sense because they're in the desert, so they're going to be able to camouflage around sand and rocks. So next is going to be Polis, and they're not necessarily a tribe or a clan, it's the capital of the Grounders. There are a lot more scavenge and handmade items kind of out and about. It's a marketplace. They're normal folks, not warriors. They're vendors and the like. It's kind of cool to see that it's got this sort of rustic marketplace type of feel. There are people who are cooking, there are people who are selling items they found, and everyone is dressed very differently than the Grounder warriors. Eventually, when Clark is hanging out with the Grounders, she gets to have fashion 2 times. Both when she's with Lexa, who she falls in love with. One time it's a cool outfit that just looks really fashionable, and the other time is this really beautiful, lovely nightgown house dress thing, and it looks like the first time she was able to just take a breath and let go. So the Flame Keepers are in charge of the chip that keeps the memories of all of the past commanders, which are the leaders of the Grounders. If you've seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, it's almost like a technological version of the Avatar. So the Flame Keepers keep track of that and help train and teach each commander. They look like post-apocalyptic monks, but they also look like wizards. They have probably the most streamlined Grounder look with not a lot of decoration, and they also sort of look like the closest thing to a sect, where they're almost all wearing close to the same thing. I wanted to point out that the Asgeda, the Ice Clan, they have a lot of fur and scarification, which is something you don't really see in a lot of places, but this also shows the importance of having warmth in your clothing and another kind of way of making clothing useful. The scarification is to set them apart, and the furs are to keep them warm. You don't really see that in any of the other tribes. It's a nice change. One thing that made me mad about the Grounders was when a solo challenger named Luna arrives for the Conclave. And she's wearing an outfit in a thing called the Conclave, and it's very obviously made of spandex. There's no way it would look unused and pristine 97 years in the future. There's no way. And I'm so frustrated by it. It doesn't make any sense. Then she ends up taking up the mantle of the commander, and she wears the shoulder armor cape of the Heda. And it's dirty. That beautiful silk velvet cape is dirty, the disrespect. But that being said, it makes sense that that character would disrespect the office like that, because she wants the power but not the tradition. That's good costuming. When we first see Clark at Mount Weather, she's wearing a tank top and shorts, and neither of them are sexy. Everything is a Wes Anderson level of pastel. The only thing I wonder is how they're able to keep those colors in 96 years of washing. Jaha started a virtual reality cult. Everyone looks like they're in New York or London in the 2010s, but with way more hats, just way too many bowlers. Her makeup is terrifying. It's all red and made of blood. It's absolutely the most beautiful season, and I really like how it looks, but I have questions about where they got their garments.